You have spent years watching these men and calling them monsters, calling them villains, telling yourself you would never understand how someone becomes that. But here is the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Every single one of these men makes complete internal logical sense, and that is the most disturbing thing about them. Tony Soprano. Everyone who watches The Sopranos eventually arrives at the same comfortable conclusion. Tony Soprano is a violent, broken man held together by therapy and ego, a product of a monstrous mother and a criminal father, someone who never had a real choice about who he became. It lets you feel sympathy without confronting what is actually happening on screen. Tony Soprano was not a victim of his environment. He was a man who chose his environment over and over again. Every single time he was given an exit because the alternative was becoming ordinary. Dr. Melfi gave him the exit repeatedly. His genuine intelligence, and Tony was genuinely intelligent, something the show insists on, could have taken him somewhere else. His wealth, by the time the series begins, was already enough to disappear into legitimacy. He did not want legitimacy. Legitimacy meant anonymity, and Tony Soprano could not survive anonymity.
It was him who called me, said he was going to be down here with the kid.
The panic attacks are the most revealing thing about him, not because they show weakness, but because of what triggers them. The ducks leaving his pool send him into a spiral that hospitalized him. On the surface, it reads as anxiety about family, about loss. But listen to what he tells Melfi when he finally articulates it. He is afraid of losing what he has built, not his family, what he has built, the image, the structure, the identity of Tony Soprano, which is entirely dependent on other men fearing and respecting him. The final scene of the series, the cut to black, is not ambiguous about Tony's fate. It is ambiguous about something more uncomfortable. It asks you to sit in his perspective in that diner, in that ordinary American moment, and realize that this man lived his entire life in that tension, always watching the door, always calculating, never at peace, and never willing to pay the price that peace would have cost him. Tony Soprano did not fall into the mob. He chose it because it was the only world where Tony Soprano meant something.
We've known each other many years, but this is the first time you ever came to me for counsel or for help.
Don Corleone. The Godfather is one of the most beloved films ever made, and its greatest achievement, greater than the cinematography, greater than the performances, greater than Nino Rota's score, is that it made you love a man who built his entire existence on the credible threat of violence and convinced you that what you were watching was a story about family. Don Vito Corleone is not a patriarch who was forced into crime. He is a man who discovered early and permanently that power was the only language the world consistently respected, and he became fluent in it with total deliberation. The origin matters. Young Vito Andolini arrives in America with nothing, an orphan, a name changed by bureaucratic indifference, invisible in a country that does not yet know he exists. What he discovers in those early years is not the American dream. He discovers that the American dream has a hidden architecture, and that architecture belongs to whoever is willing to enforce it. When he kills the local extortionist Fanucci, he does not do it out of desperation. He does it with extraordinary calm, extraordinary patience, and extraordinary precision. He does it because he recognized an opportunity to replace a power structure with himself at the center. This is the detail that reframes everything that follows. Vito was never reacting to the world. He was always designing it. The genius of Brando's performance is in the stillness. Vito never raises his voice. He never threatens explicitly. He speaks in the language of obligation and respect, words that sound warm until you understand that in his world, they are loaded weapons.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse is not a negotiation. It is an announcement of outcome. Vito has already decided. The conversation is theater, and the theater serves a purpose. It allows the person across from him to feel that they had a choice, which makes their compliance more durable and their resentment easier to manage. Don Corleone did not build a family. He built a dynasty that consumed everyone who loved him. Frank Lucas. Frank Lucas did not enter the drug trade because he had no options. He entered it because he had already decided at a foundational level that the rules of the legitimate world were not rules he had agreed to. This distinction matters enormously. There is a version of Frank Lucas that history romanticizes. The self-made man, the disruptor, the genius who cut out the cartel middlemen and flew raw heroin directly from Southeast Asia in the coffins of American soldiers. The logistics alone were extraordinary. The discipline required to build and maintain that operation inside Harlem while remaining invisible to law enforcement for years was genuinely remarkable. Blue Magic, his product, his brand, his pride, was destroying the exact community Frank Lucas presented himself as a product of. The people buying it were his neighbors, his community, the same people whose exclusion from legitimate power structures he would cite as justification for his own path. Frank Lucas understood supply chains, understood branding, understood vertical integration before the language existed in mainstream business culture, and he aimed every bit of that intelligence at the most vulnerable population available to him and called it commerce. The church detail is the one that defines him completely. Frank Lucas attended church regularly, visibly. He tithed, he was present, he performed the rituals of community and faith with apparent sincerity. And on Monday, he went back to running an operation that was dismantling that same community from the inside. This was not hypocrisy in the conventional sense. Hypocrisy implies awareness of the contradiction and discomfort with it. What Denzel Washington understood about Frank Lucas, and what makes the performance so precise, is that the most dangerous thing about him was never the violence. The violence was occasional, surgical, and always purposeful. The most dangerous thing was the absolute certainty. Frank Lucas never doubted himself. Not when he was building the operation, not when he was attending church the next morning, not when he was watching his product hollow out the block he grew up on. He had constructed a self-image so total and so internally consistent that external reality simply could not penetrate it. He called himself a businessman, and in the most clinical possible sense, he was right. He just never accounted for the cost of the business in human terms, because accounting for it would have required him to become someone other than Frank Lucas. And Frank Lucas, like every man on this list, was far too attached to who he was to consider the price of it.
So what was I saying?
Tony Montana. Every generation inherits Tony Montana and mistakes him for an aspiration.
And who won't fuck me? Cause she's in a coma.
The posters go up in dorm rooms and barbershops. The quotes get repeated with genuine reverence. The world is yours. Every day above ground is a good day. A Cuban refugee who arrived with nothing and built an empire through sheer will and violence. The story gets read as triumph, as proof of concept, as the American dream with the mask removed. What almost nobody stops to ask is the question the film is screaming from the first frame to the last. What exactly did Tony Montana want? And was he even capable of recognizing it if he got it? The consensus reading of Scarface is rise and fall. Man climbs too high, loses control, destroys himself. It is a clean narrative, and it is almost entirely wrong. Tony Montana did not destroy himself by wanting too much. He destroyed himself because he never developed the capacity to want correctly. From the moment he arrives in Miami, Tony is not pursuing a goal. He is pursuing a feeling. The feeling of being seen, of being impossible to ignore, of taking up so much space in a room that no one can pretend he does not exist. Every decision he makes, from his first murder to his last stand, is in service of that feeling rather than any coherent vision of what his life should actually look like. Watch how he studies Frank Lopez in the early scenes. Lopez is already successful, already powerful, already everything Tony claims to want. But Tony does not look at Lopez with the reverence of a student. He looks at him with contempt, because Lopez is comfortable, and comfort reads to Tony as weakness. And weakness is the one thing Tony Montana cannot tolerate in himself or anyone around him. This is the engine of his self-destruction, and it is running from the beginning. The mansion sequence, the final act, the siege, the last stand, gets remembered as one of cinema's great action set pieces. But strip away the spectacle and what you are watching is a man who has systematically destroyed every relationship that could have given his life meaning, who is sitting alone in a room the size of a small country surrounded by monuments to his own ego, conducting a one-man war against an army because surrender would require him to be something smaller than Tony Montana. He dies the way he lived, in maximum volume, maximum chaos, maximum visibility. He gets the death he would have chosen, and that is the most tragic thing about him. Tony Montana is not a cautionary tale about greed. He is a portrait of a man who confused visibility with meaning and paid for that confusion with everything he had.
So I fuck up. Let me talk to this guy. Please, let me talk to him a minute.
Jimmy Conway, portrayed by Robert De Niro in Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, is introduced to us as the archetypal mob legend, generous, magnetic, the kind of man other men want to impress. He walks into a room and the room reorganizes itself around him. He is the figure every young criminal in that world wants to become. Henry Hill idolizes him. The audience is seduced by him, and that seduction is entirely by design, both Scorsese's and Jimmy's own. But beneath the charisma, Scorsese is constructing something far more disturbing than a lovable criminal. He is building a psychological portrait of a man who has mastered the most dangerous weapon in organized crime, the performance of loyalty. Jimmy Conway does not simply act loyal, he engineers trust. Every round of drinks he buys, every envelope of cash he slides across a table, every arm around a shoulder. These are not gestures of affection, they are investments, and Jimmy Conway always collects. Robert De Niro plays this with extraordinary restraint.
What'd you say? Are you being a fucking wise guy with me?
There are no grand declarations of menace, no theatrical villainy. What De Niro gives us instead is a man who is completely still at his center, calm the way only someone with total control can be calm. His eyes do the work that his words refuse to do. Watch the way he observes people in a room. He is not socializing, he is calculating. Then comes the Lufthansa heist, the largest cash robbery in American history at that time. Millions of dollars, and the moment the money is secured, Jimmy Conway begins eliminating the very men who made it possible. One by one, people he embraced, people he vouched for, people who trusted him with their lives because he had spent years making himself worthy of that trust. This is the philosophical core of what makes Jimmy Conway so deeply unsettling as a character. He does not betray loyalty. He exposes the fact that his version of loyalty was a construction, a tool he wielded with the same coldness he wielded everything else. The warmth was real enough to feel, but it was never unconditional. It existed only as long as it remained strategically useful. And what Scorsese understands, what separates Goodfellas from every other mob film, is that this is not an aberration within the criminal world. Jimmy Conway is not a monster who broke the rules. He is the rules fully realized. The entire mythology of mob loyalty, the brotherhood, the codes, Scorsese uses Jimmy to argue that it was always a story men told themselves to make violence feel meaningful.
Relax, okay? Jimmy, I need the money. Relax. I'm relaxing. I need the money.
5 men, 5 empires, one shared hunger to exist on their own terms, whatever the cost. None of them were accidents. Each kept choosing long after reason was gone. That isn't a portrait of monsters. It's human desire without restraint, the part we all recognize, even when we wish we didn't. You weren't watching from the outside. You were closer than you wanted to